Hello and welcome to Indo World Cup Daily. Well, Vera Powell has given an update on the fitness of Denise O'Sullivan. Denise is in a moon boot with that shin injury, but Vera Powell is hopeful she'll be fit for that opening game against Australia on Thursday. Dave Kelly is in Brisbane. Dave, this injury to Denise, not as bad as it could have been.
No, good morning, guys. I promised you, son, it's disappearing over the south bank there behind me. So I'm true to my word. It's a reluctant sun though, a few clouds, and that's pretty, I suppose, opposite in terms of nature being a pathetic fallacy. The really good news is that her World Cup is still alive. There's bone bruising. There's no fracture on the shin, despite the fact that she had to go to the hospital. But she had scans and a CT scan and X-rays, and actually got back to the team hotel about 10 minutes, 20 minutes after we left last night. But I saw her this morning in the hotel walking around. She'd been out for coffee, I think, with one of the girls. And the mood is kind of, I wouldn't say it's buoyantly upbeat. They have a recovery session today, but there isn't a sense of darkened gloom at all. But, there is anxiety because it's going to be a really touch and go 48 hours to really see how this kind of injury settles with rest and recovery. They have a day off tomorrow. And really, there'll be a sense of Monday when she pitches up with weight. Basically, it's a left leg. She's not weight bearing at the moment, so it's what happens when weight goes on it. I mean, I'm sure she'd be doing sort of basic, maybe pool stuff or whatever, stretching and stuff, and the usual rice, as you remember, as amateur. Well, I do as a very poor amateur sports person. And then on Monday we'll get a good sense of when they're back on the pitch, because they're only going to be 3 days away then from D-Day against Australia, and all the ramifications of whether you take a risk with somebody like that, whether you there's a deadline of 24 hours before Australia, whether you scratch somebody altogether. I would dare to suggest that even if she's not available for Australia, she won't be scratched because she's so important that you may need her even up until the 31st in the final group game against Nigeria, which could be decisive. So, but all that will have to be just figured out on Monday, Tuesday, whether she trains properly, gets into some sort of sense of recovery, and that there are no setbacks. But, the headline news is that all the overnight prayers, novenas, candles and windows from the Irish supporters back home for Denise O'Sullivan's health and well-being are, I keep the candles lit a little bit, but I mean, most of the strong faith has been rewarded, and it seems like it's trending, as we say, in the right direction.
Yeah, good. And as you say, like the next 24, 48 hours is going to be critical in terms of how she recovers. So Vera Powell had that unscheduled press conference this morning to give you that update on Denise. And also she gave a timeline of events of how that friendly against Colombia unfolded, because it was, of course, closed to the media. No media were allowed inside there. And she also said how Ruisha Littlejohn got a kind of a tackle just before that tackle on Denise.
Yeah, it seems the most extraordinary quarter game, I suppose, and like, it is extraordinary for a game to be arbitrarily abandoned by one side, and as we'll probably mention later, the Colombians kind of countered that with their own accusation, but. It seemed to. I mean, Vera Powell, we met her this morning, our time, before they went for their recovery session out in the same venue, ironically. And it must be said, they actually completed a session last night with their own internal game. But there had really been no. I mean, there's a vague allusion to a sense amongst maybe the Colombians that they were, I suppose, little bit taught, but there was no anticipation of what was to come. I mean, the game started off pretty lively. Apparently, Louise Quinn, who I think is she third top goal scorer, she had a header off the bar early on, and Courtney Brosnan was brought into action with a good one-on-one save, and so there was like a decent football game going on before hostilities kind of imperceptibly introduced themselves into the affair. And like, I was keen to get a gauge on, like, was there, you know, because a couple of the Irish girls look to look after themselves as well and aren't afraid of putting it about and aren't afraid of the physical stuff. But no, there was no sense of that there had been a tackle initiated by the Irish. And obviously we're dealing with the fact we have no footage of this at all and no corroboration. But the sense that we're getting from the Irish is that the Colombians just started putting it a little bit over the 8. And obviously, if there was a yellow card issue through that horrendous tackle on Little John around 16, 17 minutes. So that's an independent verification from a referee, Caitlin Williams, the local referee. And that was a pretty severe tackle, and play stopped for about 90 seconds while that was dealt with. And that was the first indication that something was really kind of wrong. And Vera Powell approached the Colombian bench and their manager, Nelson Abadia, because there wasn't a sense that there was any sense of, I suppose, violent insurrection emanating from the bench. It seemed to be just all on the field from the players. And that's why it seemed so surprising, because the benches seemed very calm. But Abadia kind of subtly dismissed the claims and just sort of said, yeah, listen, it's nothing to do with us. You know, Powell went back. Then she went back and actually approached the team manager and said, listen, we're all going to try and go play in a World Cup here. What's the story? Why are these players losing their head a little bit? And again, the team manager was a little bit diffident about the whole thing. And then, of course, bang, about 90 seconds later, Denise O'Sullivan gets smashed. And howl of anguish and stuff. And then, like, Powell even went onto the pitch, which she says she rarely has done in her long career in coaching. And then there was just a lengthy, this is where the dispute with the Colombians comes in. There was a lengthy congress really amongst the players, and Vera discussed it with the players, and Katie McCabe, the captain, and Mark Callum, who's the director of football, was in attendance. And, you know, having gleaned from the players, like, as Vera said, she saw fear really in their eyes, and she worried about their safety. And like, that's erotic given all we've heard in the last few months about Vera Powell supposed to be emotionally and physically abusing players, but she was actually worried about their safety, and approached Mark Callum, who was in attendance, the director of football, who's here in his role as the overseer of Irish football. And he contacted Jonathan Hill in Dublin, the FEI CEO, because I'm sure there are bureaucratic, even though it's behind closed doors, uncapped friendly, there are bureaucratic kind of hoops and stuff, and I's and T's that need to be crossed before, I suppose, one has to take such an extraordinary and pretty much unprecedented move. Although ironically and sadly and grimly, in another sphere of life, we had an incident with the under-21s against Kuwait, which I'm sure followed the same procedure recently. But back to this one, and that's what happened. And within about 10-15 minutes, they decided to come off the pitch, really. And again, just to kind of indicate that it seemed to be all from the players. You know, the Colombian backroom team very calmly, you know, disassembled from the arena and left on the bus. There was no kind of howls of outrage or protest from management or whatever. But obviously then we've seen you will have seen the video on our social media and our website from the Colombian defender pretty much sticking it in the Irish girls' faces, saying that they were girls and let them eat shit, and that actually they decided to walk off because the Irish were just talking amongst themselves. So it led the news over in Colombia, as I'm sure it might do at home. They don't feel they've done anything wrong, but that basically ended it. But as I say, I mean, the Irish seem to get themselves together mentally and physically, and they completed their session with an internal game to kind of make sure that they get all their training loads and that all the players, because they wanted to use all 23 players, as I said yesterday, and give 2 11s basically effectively a half each. And so they ended up doing that and completed the session and arrived back here a couple of hours later as had been scheduled.
Yeah, a lot of detail there, Dave. I can't say that I expected the kind of headline, "Let them eat shit," to be one of the headlines out of this World Cup. But what was the reaction by Vera Powell when I think he told her what the Colombians were saying after the game, and she seemed quite surprised, obviously, with their reaction to what happened to Denise O'Sullivan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, quite simply, and as I alluded to earlier, I mean, she was quite shocked when she heard that. She hadn't heard or seen it, and for her, it just indicated that players' sense of mind, really, and their attitude while they were on the field. In terms of it would seem from what we have heard, and obviously from the brief details of the game, that there was a sense of just players being out of control and very loose and playing with a certain sense of alacrity and no regard for welfare, really. So that kind of, it did shock her, but also it kind of did fit into what her perception or feeling about the game was, that it was actually the players who had suddenly decided to embark upon this route as opposed to anything with the management. And I mean, the further kind of element of surprise is that, like, they didn't kind of, and we have to be careful here in terms of any kind of stereotypical definitions of nations, that like Colombia weren't plucked out of the sky as an opponent. I mean, they had maybe looked for a local opponent, but they chose Colombia because they've chosen different styles of teams, whether it's Zambia for obvious reasons, but France because they're a level nation like the US, and they chose China as a different style. They mixed and matched between playing decent opposition, higher ranked opposition, and different styles of opposition. And they chose Colombia because they don't really play South African teams or South American teams that often. And they did scout them. They scouted them quite extensively in terms of their recent games, and there was no evidence of any let's say politely, roughhousery from the Colombians. So that's again why this kind of came out of the blue. There wasn't a sense that we were playing, the kind of Uruguayan team of the 60s or anything like that. So that's again why this is sort of, it came as such a kind of a sudden shock to them last night when this kind of football, I suppose, on-field violence erupted.
Yeah, and of course, just before we wrap, Dave, obviously Vera Powell will be hoping Denise O'Sullivan will be fit, but she's also got to start pre-planning now, doesn't she, before that game? If she doesn't make it, and will still remain part of the squad. So what are the ramifications, if Denise doesn't make it for Australia?
Well, I mean, as I said, the stark one is that she doesn't make Australia, and doesn't look like she's going to make either of the other two games on the 26th, Canada, or the 31st against Nigeria. And then you're pulling out the emergency button, which it's a fine emergency button in terms of Jamie Finn, who obviously started and finished the campaign and started the majority of the games in the campaign, and is a very adequate, although not essential, but she can, she's a very adequate defensive style player who can pick a pass. Obviously, she's not Denise O'Sullivan. Nobody is, as Vera Powell reminded us today. She's out of this category, as she said in her kind of broken Dutch, but she meant out of this world, which she is. She's a world-renowned star, and she's such, as I said yesterday, an indispensable part of this team. If they don't pull that emergency trigger, they just have to make do. And as I said again last night, it will probably lead them towards a slightly even more conservative option in terms of team selection. But, they played against Zambia without her and won 3-2, and Zambia beat Germany, who are one of the favourites for this competition, 3-2. So, they have shown they can cope without her. It's coping without her for the longer term in this tournament. That's, I suppose, probably the real worry. But, you wanted everything to be going right heading into your opening game against Australia. And this has rocked their world. Whether it rocks their World Cup is another story. But, they are resilient, and they dealt with lots of setbacks before on and off the field. And it's such it's a cliche. I talked about the cliches of the World Cup scare and the World Cup hotel doorstepping last night. But again, in another great cliche, and they're cliches because they're true. I mean, this could galvanize the squad.
Yeah.
This could steal the squad. You never know.
Yeah.
But the main thing is, again, for Denise O'Sullivan, you know, I think everyone just hopes she gets on the field, regardless of even results or performance at this stage. She deserves to play the World Cup, and hopefully she will still get the chance.
Yeah. And just before we go, Dave, what's your itinerary like there now? When do the squad leave Brisbane and travel to Sydney?
Well, my itinerary is that I would love to meet somebody I haven't met in about 2.5 days, which is Mr. Sleep. The Irish team will head up to Sydney, I believe, on the day before the game. No, sorry, I think they're flying match day -1, which is Wednesday morning. I'm also flying up on Wednesday morning as well. We are meeting hopefully the Australians tomorrow, possibly with the daughter and granddaughter of Ballymun, Mary Fowler. She might be around as well, the goal scorer as mentioned last night. But we're going to be in Camp Australia, which is the Ireland have a day off, but obviously the independents, hardworking men and women on the road don't have any days off. So it'll be kind of nice to just kind of check out of this kind of grim hospital watch to try and check in with the Australians and see what's going on with them as well, and check them out. So that's kind of the itinerary for tomorrow. And then Monday, Ireland have a media day, so you know there'll be a hope. It'll be before their training session, so we won't get a huge sense of Denise O'Sullivan's fitness until probably later that day, and then we'll let you know then. But yeah, that's what we're looking like for the next couple of days. So if these bloody Evis stop squawking, I might get a couple of hours of shut eye and a proper meal.
Yeah. Okay. I really, really do hope you do get some sleep, Dave, with all the hard work you're doing over there. But for now, we'll talk to you soon.